We begin in France, where French President Emmanuel Macron has defended his decision to call snap elections. His press conference comes just days after he dissolved France's lower house of parliament. The centrist coalition suffered a resounding defeat in Sunday's EU elections against the far-right National Rally. In his first news conference since calling for a new poll, he explained why he had no choice.
Sunday evening, this was a clear vote. It was about Europe itself, as I've always said. But the votes cast have strengthened the right and the far right even more than in the past. This was a political earthquake, and we cannot simply ignore it and proceed with business as usual. Our citizens have expressed their concern about security, migration, purchasing power. They have shown their displeasure at the current situation.
Let's cross straight over to our correspondent, Sonia Phalnikar, who's been standing by in Paris. Sonia, I know you were following President Macron's speech. What are your main takeaways from that?
Well, Terry, it was a really kind of sprawling speech where President Macron, talked about his priorities, his party's priorities for the campaign, but also talked about, of course, the threat of the far right, the rise of the extremes, as he called it, the threat of the far right and the far left. And of course, this is something that is being watched very closely in France because, President Macron is kind of, I think, gambling on the fact that calling this snap election is the only way to kind of keep the far right away, the only way to kind of rally mainstream voters and get them to see just how dangerous a far right in power could be. But there is no guarantee that this could, of course, work. It could actually backfire, and we could see the far right getting a real shot at power on the national level in France, which would, of course, have huge consequences, not just for France, but also for Europe. So I think President Macron's, one of the main things for me was that he kind of called on moderate forces to rally behind what he called a Republican front, parties that share the same Republican values, to really come together, bury their differences, and try and, counter the extremes.
What did we learn in that news conference, Sonia, about Macron's motivation for calling the snap election? Because he was certainly not compelled to do so. He's able to stay in power as president until 2027.
That is right. I mean, he really was not constitutionally obliged to call the snap election and to dissolve parliament. But I think what he referred to there was the fact that he simply doesn't have a majority in parliament ever since the last legislative elections in 2022. He presides over a minority government. And this has meant that he has been really hamstrung in parliament, really struggling to pass bills. He has, periodically resorted to a special constitutional provision to force legislation through, like a very controversial pension reform that we saw last year, raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. That sparked huge protests. And I think what he was trying to say was that this situation is really untenable. I need some kind of clarity. I need to have a better mandate so we can, I can pass those reforms. So I think this was basically what he seemed to suggest was the motivation for him calling snap elections.
Well, following his announcement of that snap election, new political alliances are being formed within the country, preparing for the campaign for this new election. What's taking shape in France's political landscape right now, Sonia?
Well, there's a lot of frenzied negotiation going on between political parties to form possible alliances because they simply don't have a lot of time to do this. The first round of voting takes place on June 30th at the end of this month. What we saw yesterday was the president of the centre-right Republican Party, Eric Ciotti, suggesting a cooperation with the far-right National Rally led by Marine Le Pen. This has led to howls of protest and anger in France. Today we heard from the far-right National Rally President Jordan Bardella saying that it's likely that they will be supporting what he says are tens of MPs from the Republicans in these elections. We don't have any details on that. On the far right, we might there were talks of a possible deal between another far right party, but that seems to be collapsing. On the left, what we do have is the center-right socialists and three other parties coming together. They said they would work together in these legislative elections in a grouping called the Popular Front. And they say the main aim is to kind of defeat what they say is the far right's racist project, but also provide an alternative to President Macron. So there are a lot of alliances, political alliances now crystallizing, I think, on the right and the left.
Sonia, thank you. That was our correspondent, Sonia Phalnikar, in Paris.